Welcome to this video tutorial with Virtual Racing School for the Laptime series on iRacing. This week the series heads to the flowing but challenging Suzuka circuit, where I'll be looking at a lap driven by Rens Broekman in the BMW Z4 GT3, which is driven in default afternoon weather to match the official series. I'll play the lap in full for you first before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 2-minute 00.436. So here we are then, as ever, starting off from the list of data packs on the VRS website. We're going to choose the BMW data pack by Rens Broekman, and it's the last week of the series at Suzuka. Opens the session details, which is where you can download the lap files to compare your driving in the sim, the replay, and of course the race setup. We're just going to click on Learn Track, which will load up the driving analyzer. It will start to play the lap through from the beginning, and if you're not familiar with this, basically you've got a steering angle input trace for each sector. You've got the speed of the car and brake and throttle inputs as well. So obviously the throttle's at 100, brake at 0 on the start-finish straight. So we'll just play it through. I've already slowed it down to half speed and muted it. Obviously you want to keep the car nice and straight, take the most direct route to the outside of turn 1. We'll just skip forward a little bit. Spotting your braking point, which is going to be around this 50-meter marker. Now we'll just go back and I can switch to chase view so you can see that more clearly. Now braking point for turn 1 is not super critical. It's such a fast entry. The most important thing though is that you don't brake too late, because then you'll be in trouble. So you can see here that Rens starts to brake fairly early on, like I said, around the 50 or a few car lengths before then, and he's actually modulating his brake input. So we can see he's actually braking quite hard initially and then sort of easing off and then just adjusting as he feels the car through the corner. So it's very much about feeling the car through this first corner. So you want a nice early turn in. We can actually see that Rens starts to turn in well before he's actually hit the brakes. And obviously the BMW has lots of grip at high speed. It's got good aerodynamics relative to the other GT3s especially. So he's taken an early first apex here. So he's going quite tight on entry, still braking at this point, but he's heavily reduced the brake input as well. And basically what you want to do is if the car's starting to over rotate like this, you can see there's a lot of yaw angle in the car right now. Just ease off the brake pressure and it will just unload the front tires and help you get the car back in line without requiring a nasty steering input. So that's why it's important to brake quite gently throughout this first corner. So we'd play it through, allow the car to run out towards the outside in between the two corners, and then bring the car back in, keep braking for your second apex, which is going to be pretty much along the middle of this curb, and that should also be when you get back on the throttle as well. So we see here Rens doesn't rush to full throttle, a slight bit of hesitation there, but he's picked it up to about 80% before then committing when he feels like he has enough room to open the car up without running off the track. Then brings it over to the right hand side to begin the high speed sequence of Esses. Now each corner through here is going to be a compromise, so you can't afford to use all of the track because you'll have to over sacrifice one of the corners to do that. So we'll just play it through. He's opened up the start of the S's as much as possible, so he's right at the edge of the circuit to begin the sequence, and he goes in for a fairly early first apex. You want to get on this curb. It's one of the few curbs that you can use through this sequence, and you can see that he's picked up the throttle, but he's not actually committed to full throttle, and that's key pretty much. So every time he picks up the throttle, as you can see, it's to about 75%, and there's only a couple of times where he feels like the track is opened out enough for him to commit to full throttle. And also notice his brake inputs throughout this section as well are very minimal. So it's really just about bringing the car in tight to the apex rather than really slowing the car down. So we can see here he's on the brakes quite gently, just tightening the car up, keeping the front end loaded. He's hit his apex, now he's back on the throttle, and he doesn't use all of the track through the exit, as you can see, because he needs to try and open up the next left-hander, but not completely. He's kind of in the middle of the circuit right now and goes in. This is quite a long one relative to the previous one, and pretty much in the middle of the track again on entry into the next right-hander. These corners pretty much get progressively longer as you go through this section, so this next right-hander is probably the slowest of the lot, so you do need a bit more brake input here, and you'll notice that he's holding that brake input all the way until he picks up the throttle. So let me just click on here. Even here he's got 1.6% brake input, so he's never actually coasting. If you're coasting, especially in this car, the car is generally understeering, which you don't want. Circuit opens up a bit slightly before this uphill left-hander of Dunlop, where he's committed to full throttle briefly, and he's been able to open up this corner fully as well. Now this is kind of optional actually, you don't actually have to open up the corner fully like this, but it obviously does give you the best opportunity of carrying the most speed up the hill. So he doesn't actually brake here, which is surprising, but I guess the car's quite loaded up the hill that he doesn't feel the need. He doesn't feel any understeer at this particular moment. So he picks up the throttle as he sort of apexes along the middle of the curb on the inside, gets close to the curb. Don't actually touch that curb, it will be very unsettling if you do that, and then let the car open out up the hill using all of the track. Just be careful that you don't drop any wheels onto the grass where the grass resumes there, and then just be really gentle with the steering. As the circuit crests, the car will go quite light, can catch you out even though it doesn't really seem like much of a corner. And then we're approaching the very challenging two Degner corners. So this is the first Degner, where Rens is braking just after the 100-meter marker. So very brief braking zone, but quite a firm braking zone, so you can actually brake in a straight line, which is why he's braking so hard here for such a fast corner. It's also a very narrow corner, so a very short apex. You really need to be super precise with how you time the turn-in. So we can see here he's just aiming to clip the inside curb. The BMW rides curbs fairly well, so you can get away with this, and picks up the throttle very carefully through the exit because he's carrying a lot of speed at that point, and you really don't want to risk running wide onto the AstroTurf there. Now unfortunately for Degner 2 there's not really a brake reference. I'll just double click. I double clicked accidentally there. You might be able to spot this sort of patch of grass just beyond the AstroTurf, which can be used. Difficult to see inside the car, but it's there. It's braking pretty much alongside that point. Again, very brief but firm braking zone. Get into the apex nice and early. Easy to run wide here. The circuit's quite banked and cambered in, especially at the apex, so you really want to make sure you get in that and take advantage of that. Getting close to this curb, but don't make contact with it ideally. And we can see through the exit just a little bit of hesitation as he's had to pick up the throttle aggressively to avoid understeer, but then just had to feather slightly through the exit to avoid running wide. This curb is quite tall through the exit, so it's a bit risky. You risk bottoming out if you run too wide through there. And then keep the car straight to the left edge of the circuit as we approach the hairpin. Now unfortunately on approach there's a very fast right-hander, which if you're comfortable, especially through the latter stages of a long stint, if you've got excessive tyre wear, you can actually feather off the throttle slightly before you start braking, or you can do what Rens is doing and lift fairly early on, coast for just a little bit, and then apply the brakes very progressively. So you really don't want to be stamping on the brakes in here, and the reason for that is you will still have entry lock on from the right hand kink. So we can see that Rens has some steering lock on until now, and that's when he's able to get nearer to peak brake pressure, which in this car is actually quite high. It's going to be about 85% or so before the ABS engages. So you want to get the car slowed down as quickly as possible in a straight line, turn in fairly late and get the car stopped. It's important that you don't turn in with too much speed, that you get the car slowed down enough that you can keep it nice and settled as you rotate, get the car turned nice and tight, and get the power down early on for a decent exit. So we can see here that he's picked up the throttle for a fairly late apex, but is able to straighten the car up quite quickly and get the full throttle relatively quickly as well. Through the next right-hander up towards Spoon, just hug the inside line, take the easily flat out this, but you want to just travel the least amount of distance. So just open the car up slightly in between here, and then bring the car back over looking for this curb, and then spotting your braking reference, which is going to be relative to this access road here just on the right hand side. You're going to be braking a few car lengths before there. Fairly brief braking zone, but you can brake quite hard. Just you want to turn in fairly early on. The first part of Spoon is quite quick, so you want to turn in quite early to make sure you hit that apex. It will open up in the middle, but carry those brakes all the way through. You'll notice that Rens gradually trails off the brakes, but he never actually fully releases them, again to avoid or eliminate understeer. Gets back on the throttle again briefly as the circuit opens up before braking for the second part of Spoon. Pretty close to this curb, just avoid running too wide onto the AstroTurf in between. And then he's probably turned in slightly early there because he's actually coasting. Again, you want to avoid coasting if possible, but it's something that you can do. You can alternate between coasting and braking to modify your line as necessary. So we can see here he's feeling the need to retighten the car slightly to pick up his apex, and the circuit's going to fall away down here. So through the exit the car actually feels like it should have a lot more grip than it actually does in reality. So we can see here that Rens picks up the throttle quite early and fairly aggressively, but again super hesitant and patient before committing to full throttle. So waits for the car to straighten out. He's carrying a lot of speed at that point, and you can see there that when he does actually commit to full throttle, the car still gets away with him, even though he was super patient. So just be careful with that. It's important that you keep the car nice and neat through the exit, because you want a nice, good, clean run down the hill towards 130R. Just skip it through, take the least distance possible, the most direct route to the outside for the entry to 130R, which is going to be denoted by this 50-meter marker. again, and you're pretty much going to be braking and turning in simultaneously to this one. So it's a very brief dab on the brakes, and again, similar to Degner 1, you need to be very precise with your timing through here. So there's a very small apex to hit, but super important to carry your speed. So you want to turn in quite early. The car will understeer mid-corner through here, so you want to make sure that you don't wash out and miss the apex. And then you should be able to pick up the throttle hard through the exit, and we can see here that Rens was able to commit to full throttle running up to the exit curb, but no wider than that. And now we head into the final sequence on the circuit, the final chicane, where Rens will be braking a few car lengths before the 100-meter marker, and this is by far the heaviest braking zone on the whole circuit. So you want to brake quite aggressively initially, get the speed slowed down, keep the car in a straight line, don't turn in too early, that's quite important, and then bleed off the brakes as you turn in. We've got the car slowed down quite a lot now in second gear, aiming to pick up this entry curb. Again, the BMW can tolerate that. Bit of throttle in between, don't run too wide because you don't want to destroy your entry and therefore your exit out of the last corner. A little dab on the brakes again just to get the car rotated on entry, and then you want to be really neat and tidy over this final curb. Don't take too much of it, I'll just show you that again. So he's actually chosen to not go onto the green painted concrete there, and increase the throttle nice and carefully, straighten the car up, anticipate a little bit of oversteer that you might have, and also even through the right-hander. It's an acceleration zone, so just be wary of that. You can actually see Rens does feather out of the throttle just to keep the rear end in check. The BMW doesn't have the best traction, being front-engined, so you want a nice clean exit to cross the start-finish line to complete the lap. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracerschool.com, where you can also book coaching including group classes with world champions from the likes of Koanda Simsport. Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.